Well, it is great to be here today, and just a huge round of applause for Gallagher for bringing this amazing event to life. Wow. I have golfed for over 20 years, okay? I'm not a pro at all, but I started golfing when I was a lawyer. Over 20 years ago, in 2000, right? I was on the recruiting committee, and one of the things we would do is we would do these activities during the summer to recruit law clerks into the firm. And so, of course, the guys wanted to do golf. And so we would wake up really early in the morning, because us attorneys still had to fill hours. And so we'd wake up super early, go hit the golf course, and I was really intimidated. I was like, oh no, I don't know how to golf. But I was going because I was on the recruiting committee. I wanted to spend time with these new clerks. And so, what I found is that I wasn't as bad as I thought. Because what was happening, I'm going to use my microphone for a second, or maybe, I don't know, my clicker. What would happen, right, is the guys would get up, and they would just whack the ball as hard as they could, right? It was almost like their goal was to hit the ball as hard as they could, but it would slice to the left and the right. And I would sit there during our golf games being like, they're spending all their time in the bushes. I was like, what? My golf swing wasn't as hard, but it was straight. Because my golf swing hadn't been messed up by years of playing baseball. And so I started golfing and actually enjoying it and taking some pro lessons. And if you get the right pro, what you'll find is their goal isn't to teach you how to do the big swing, right? The big, beautiful swing, that's not their goal. Their goal is to teach you how to do the basics of a good swing. So the basics is where all the technique is at, and no matter what club you're using, it's like the same basics over and over and over again. And that's how the pros become really, really great. And so today I want to talk about some leadership principles that I've learned in my career, but the basics, right, that I've learned that have finally surfaced, and I've been able to articulate the why, right, how to find my purpose, and how to find the right environments where I'm actually able to make the impact that I really hope to make in my career. And I want to reassure you, it took me a while. So it took me a while to figure this out and learn this. So hopefully I can share some principles and ideas with you all that you can take and leapfrog and learn from my mistakes and accelerate your careers faster than I was able to do. The thing about our careers is they're very fluid, right? We're always kind of building to the next opportunity, and I'm actually thinking ahead of what else am I going to add on to InclusionPro? Now, my company's not going anywhere because I love what I do, but I want to continue to grow and have an impact in certain areas. So you never know what's going to be next for any of you, right, in the future. But clearly, I did not have a clear career path, and for a lot of it, I was figuring it out, many times without the right mentorship. And so what I love about this opportunity is to bring women together and to share our learnings and things that we can, so that we can accelerate our leadership abilities. So I want to illustrate a model it's actually in your workbook. So not workbook, I say workbook because can you tell I just went into training mode? It's in your workbook. Please open that up. But Gallagher was kind enough to actually include kind of a worksheet so that nobody would have to take notes or anything. You could follow along and just reflect. Kind of think about your own career, things that you've learned, and see if this resonates with you. So I finally defined a model because I said, I don't really know how to explain my career. All I know is that I want to have impact. Anywhere I go, any role, I want to be able to be the change that I want to see. And so what is it that enables that to happen? And there's been my career opportunities where that hasn't happened as well, and you just feel frustrated and entrenched and just And then there's those opportunities where you're like, I feel so powerful, I feel like I can do anything, right? How do we get into those spaces? So this diagram looks a little bit complicated, and I'm going to break it down for you, so don't worry. But I just want to illustrate first how this showed up for me, starting with Women Tech Council, which was in 2007. Now remember, I was practicing patent law at the time, and I kind of was convinced I didn't have any good ideas. Because what does a patent attorney do all day long? They protect other people's ideas, right? So I was protecting really cool innovations, technology, all this, AI stuff that now you're seeing. I was protecting that 20 years ago with patents, and I was convinced that there's people born on this earth that have great ideas. And I was born to protect those people's great ideas. So I was really kind of in this fixed mindset of not really understanding my true potential, but I knew that I was incredibly passionate about getting more women into tech because of things that I had experienced in my career. So I happily joined to see how I could contribute to the organization. So I found over time that there was these personal drivers that started to surface, and I could start to recognize these and articulate them. I want to describe them really quickly for you. And these are in the large, bold, necessity, passion, discovery, these words, these three drivers. And with necessity, what I found is that I needed more women, not just at entry level, but in leadership. It's really lonely to be in leadership. And there's really no reason that we shouldn't have more women in leadership in every single sector of our state, okay? So, of course, you have to bring in the pipeline, but it's really about growing that talent and retaining it, just like all of our organizations are trying to do, into leadership. The passion for me came from the fact that I really felt like we were missing out on the competitive advantage of having really brilliant women in leadership. In my career of going through engineering and law, what I found is I actually did not experience gender discrimination. It was when I went into industry that I was shocked to discover my gender actually mattered, right? I was able to really outperform whenever I wanted, but now it was like I had hit like a brick wall, and that really shocked me. And what happens when that happens, right? We start to hold back, we start to feel devalued, and we start to not want to really give 100% of what we're capable of doing, which is a shame. So I've talked to hundreds and thousands of women and who are experiencing those similar things, and they want to be fully engaged to their maximum abilities. So I really feel like organizations that can figure this out can really benefit from that competitive advantage of the diversity of thought and those amazing contributions that they're missing out on. And then discovery was interesting for me. Remember, I didn't have any good ideas. I'm just, an attorney. And, I had to kind of break out of this mindset of you are not your title. And there's actually all of these skills, but you have to have the right environment to be able to exercise those skills. And so none of us had actually formed a nonprofit before. We didn't come with we actually didn't know what to do exactly. We just knew that we wanted to make an impact and a difference. So a lot of it we were learning on the job. But here's what we did have, is all of us were entrepreneurs or building or growing like me. I was building and growing a professional practice. So we all had these business skills that we were bringing to the table. And so we basically treated it like a business. We said, well, how would you grow a nonprofit or make an impact if it was a real profit business? And so we actually incorporated all of those skills that you would as an executive into the nonprofit. And then the other benefit we had was that I had actually gone through the career path, going through a STEM degree, going through a law degree, going through the career pipeline, right? Knowing where you get stuck, where the additional barriers, what they start to look like. And so we had this advantage of those experiences so that we could create a sustainable organization. What we didn't want, what was kind of happened before was there was a couple of organizations that had started for women in tech, right? And then they would just kind of die out after a couple of years. And we thought, gosh, if we do this, let's make it sustainable. So 16 years later, it's still going, which is wonderful. But yeah, hopefully all of you are members of that if you're in tech. Every org's a tech company now, by the way. But the environmental drivers were also critically important. So I want to describe the environmental drivers that made it possible, right? Because you can't do it on your own. Just sheer will and determination isn't what's going to create change or transformation. So the environmental drivers are these middle crosshairs: determination, exploration, and experimentation. So the determination in this case looked like recruiting an entire ecosystem of people who wanted to help us solve this problem. So before, what you would see is let's just get the women software engineers together, right? But then it would just kind of fizzle out, right? Because you needed that wealth of really diversity of thought, diversity of skills and resources, just like what it takes for a tech company to succeed. You need an entire ecosystem. You need venture, you need education, you need government, you need tech executives, skilled talent, and labor. So we recruited all of that into our ecosystem to help us build and grow this organization. The exploration was a ton of fun because we didn't know what we didn't know. And so I'm just gonna give you one example of that. One time we were sitting there brainstorming and we're like, okay, we wanna do hour of code. Have any of you done hour of code in your companies or your kids? Yeah? Okay, if you haven't, it's fun. It's just 1 hour of code. And it's fun, and it's a really easy way to get your kids coding. But there's a national program, and we were like, okay, we actually want you to have the biggest hour of code project. How can we make this big? And then we thought, okay, what would it look like if we got a Guinness World Record for like the most kids participating in hour of code? Okay, what would that look like? It'd probably look like all of them, coding something and bringing it into some digital format. Okay, then we need a big jumbo screen to display this on. Okay, Jazz Center, Delta Center, we're like, no, I don't think they'll give it to us. So we're like, okay, but it's college basketball season in December. So we're like, okay, let's start calling up the colleges. So we called up a couple of them and were rejected. One of them was not very nice about it either. And then somebody got me in touch with the athletic center at the University of Utah. And so we're explaining this really big project to the athletic director. And he's like, oh, okay, How many seats are you gonna want? I'm like, well, we want at least 3,000 kids coding. A lot of them are not gonna have a driver's license. They gotta get to the game. So now we need an adult. So 6,000 tickets? And he's like, okay. He's like, I'd love to see the upper bowl all filled, for this game, and they give us a halftime spot and things like that. So you never know, right? Like, it's a great example. The fastest way to a no is to never ask. But we have just weird, random things like that because we didn't know not to ask, right? And so it was really fun to just kind of brainstorm things that just had never been done before. And then the experimentation part is really critical to make sure that the programming at every step of the pipeline from high school, college, career, executive boardroom was impactful, and always remaining open to feedback, being willing to stop the things that weren't working and shift and change into the things that did work. Okay, so this allowed me to really activate my purpose, which was shifting an entire ecosystem. And it took time. I mean, it's been 16 years, right? It didn't start out that way. The first Women Tech Award had, 120 people in the room, right? Maybe this size group. And so, but it was able to grow and scale with these drivers that were in play over time, and the patience and the effort to do that. So now that we've gone through an example using kind of my experience with Women Tech Council, I want to break down these drivers. So like in golf, now I know you're doing a putting clinic today, but the drivers, those big clubs, their purpose is to get the ball as close to the hole as possible with as few strokes as possible, right? So the drivers that have consistently shown up for me time and time again when I've really felt activated in my purpose is necessity, passion, and discovery. So these are the three things. If I'm missing one, I can tell something's off, right? In a culture or an environment where there's just something that's missing. But it's really the combination of these three that really activate my full capacities. I put in your worksheet some reflection questions that you can reflect on. Do these exist for you? In a project or something that you're working on, or in your career, or if not, maybe that's something for you to think about. Necessity, what's the need that's being solved here? What's the unfulfilled need? Early in my career, right? I just didn't want to be poor. That is perfectly fine. I will never judge someone if they take a role or career opportunity because their needs, they gotta meet their needs, right? I do not expect anyone to veer from that, right? But eventually over time, when that need is fulfilled, there might be another need or something, right, that really drives you, that you can solve for. And then passion, what motivates me to solve this problem, that thing that years later, and I'll tell startup founders this as well, right? The armchair startup founder, I'm like, well, can you be as passionate about this topic 10 years later, 20 years later? Right, and here it is almost 25 years later, I'm still so passionate about inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion. So whatever that is, doesn't have to be the same thing as mine, but whatever that is, right, it really internally comes from you. And then discovery, what are those unique perspectives that you have that you can bring to the table that maybe no one else has? And again, I spent some years doubting that I even had those abilities, right? But I think if you really dig deep, you can find that unique perspective you bring. And what I also find is when women transition from other roles into a new one, there's this interesting thing that happens like, I'm starting from scratch. I mean, no, you're not, right? You have all of this experience you're bringing into every single role or opportunity that you have. All right, so one thing about these that I noticed in my career is that some of these drivers showed up more powerfully and some were made me less effective depending on the situation I would place myself in. So if we take necessity, for example, necessity kept me really focused, and that's a really great thing, right? I don't want to be poor, all right, I'm focused. But in the wrong environment, so for example, if I'm in an environment that has scarcity mindset, I can actually go into a space that's kind of unhealthy. I can get really hyper-competitive, I can be a workaholic, perfectionist, right? So there's actually aspects of this that I had to watch for, or if I had a really good mentor, they'd put their arm around me and be like, Sarah, I need to give you some feedback, right? Those are important moments when people give you that feedback, to listen to it and not be so prideful that you're not willing to listen to what they're telling you. And I've had feedback. Passion keeps me intensely energized, right? I can wake up and just lose track of time doing, whatever I'm passionate about, but in the wrong environment, or if I'm not, watching my emotional intelligence level, I might be self-righteous, or I may be contemptuous of people that don't think like me or aren't making decisions the way I think they should be making them, right? Because I'm so passionate and I so believe in what I'm doing. And then on discovery, the learning mindset is just a wonderful space to be. I love learning. If you think about it, after I left law, everything that I've done since then, so it's like the last 13, 15 years, has been learned on the job. So I'm a big believer that you can learn so much on the job, but also that you can go into idea overload, right? And sometimes you can go into failure to launch. I had one startup where we spent 9 months, right? Great ideas, failure to launch. A lot of startups die this way, right? So being watchful and mindful for when we're operating, and I'm gonna circle this middle area, when we're operating in our position of strengths, right? These same drivers, though, can also surface some weaknesses if we're not watchful. So if we can really eliminate those weaknesses or get the right mentorship and feedback to operate to our strengths, we can really smooth out, kind of round ourselves out there, and really be able to have more transformative power. So what you'll also notice in this model is my drivers combine to really identify the environmental drivers that really worked for me. So necessity and passion combine to create determination. Passion and discovery combine to create exploration. And then discovery and necessity combine for experimentation. No matter how passionate you are, no matter how much you believe in what you're doing, you can't do it alone, right? You've got to have the right environment, you've got to have the right people to work with. I mean, I've been the single change agent and I have been emotionally exhausted from doing that, right? And so I learned to look for these environmental drivers where I'm able to partner with the right people to make change happen. So I'm gonna just describe these really quickly for you, and they're also in your workbook, some reflection questions. Determination, do I have grit, the social support and the resources, right, to be able to make change? Exploration, do I have emotional space for curiosity and creativity? Ability to think through problems differently. And experimentation, do I collaborate, right? So that's the people-to-people part. Measure impact and iterate. So that's the business-driven part. When you have these things combined, change might not happen immediately, right? But it's about the basics over and over and over again, and being able to create transformational change. That's my golf ball. Going around. A lot of times when we hear transformation, we think, oh my gosh, I gotta go build a huge nonprofit. No, not at all. We're all busy. That's not the message I want you to take away today. But hopefully there's a way in your current work that you can actually create the impact that you want to have. So for me, that happens to be in my diversity, equity, inclusion consulting. And I call it DEI transformation because it specifically for me connotes something different than maybe some of the best practices we were using. So if you think about before the pandemic, a lot of the ways that we would do diversity, equity, inclusion were really kind of grassroots. They were really driven by entry-level, mid-level folks in the organization. And that just never creates the type of behavioral change. I did know that there was a disconnect between sometimes what we would see on the outside that companies were doing and saying, and the cultures on the inside. And so I really felt there was a need to help leaders better upskill their abilities to better integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion truly within business strategy and their own leadership skills. The harder thing to do is hold a mirror up to your executive team and say, hey, are we being real honest about our culture, and are we really being inclusive in the way that we're, operating this company and building our teams? So that's actually the harder thing to do. So it's understandable why a lot of leaders might feel very uncomfortable doing that. But I also feel they're missing out on that economic opportunity by not doing so and allowing it to really come from a grassroots level. What I was also seeing is that leaders were incredibly reactive in their decision making. So if they weren't willing to go through that process, what happens? They're making uninformed decisions. So if you saw after George Floyd was murdered, the number of heads of DEI just went through the roof. Reactive, fast, decision making, very decisive. But unfortunately, there was a big alignment gap between the executive teams and the heads of DEI, and it was the fastest turnover role. What makes me passionate about this is the ability of leaders to accelerate true behavioral change. If I think about the work when I was, that junior attorney asking for maternity leave 23 years ago, which was very hard and uncomfortable, versus when I walked into InclusionPro as the CEO the first week and I saw 2 pregnant employees and I said, so what's the paid policy here? And they didn't have one, and I said, hey, let's do one. And it happened that week. Right? This does not have to be painful, but leaders are the ones that have that influence and the power to make those changes. So I feel like they can bypass a lot of the frustration that employees feel by getting better informed, educated, and integrated with DEI. And then the discovery piece was interesting. I have a lot of people ask me, how do you become a DEI consultant? And I say, do you have 20 years? Because it's not my color that makes me an expert, right? It's not my gender. It's the work that I've done in the community, the work I've done as an executive to understand how businesses operate. It's the work that I've done in learning and development to understand how to integrate all of these pieces together. So it's interesting for me to look back, and like I said, all of those career experiences that I mentioned earlier in my career, now coming forward, and I'm able to surface those skills and activate them for this type of work. And so it's really been, I think, the most joyous time of my career, because I really feel like the impact's happening in the way that I've always wanted it to happen. Let's talk about the environmental drivers. I think before the pandemic, I wouldn't be able to do the type of work that I'm able to do. There's been some significant social shifts, and I think leaders are now more aware, more willing to learn, and more willing to think differently about how they were doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that, unfortunately, I didn't cause that, and it's really unfortunate that a lot of things happened. But the silver lining is that leaders are activated more to understand that they have to come together as a leadership team, right? The single executive champion doesn't really work anymore, right? It has to be everybody on the leadership team. The exploration part has also been really fun because I never go into an org thinking, I know exactly what you should do. It's really a process of developing, partnering with the people in the organization to understand what's going to work best for your organization, your culture, and let's build something that really feels like you. And that's a really fun discovery process. And then experimentation is to be able to measure progress and to be able to hold, again, that mirror up and not just do it because it's the right thing to do, right? It's always been the right thing to do. So let's get past that and let's actually measure progress. We can use this whether it's in your personal, whether it's in your career, project, or real business strategy. These questions should apply broadly, which is why I tried to keep it basic and applicable across all areas in which we might be acting. Actually, one of the biggest challenges I work on with clients is how do you take a unified approach where the passionate folks really feel like they're being listened to, validated, and seeing the change. But if you have done any change management, it takes time. So I think for those folks, it can feel frustrating because they're like, it's really slow. I'm like, yeah, but we gotta bring everybody along. So let's say you have a 3,000, like, UTA, for example, right? 3,000 employees, right? Bringing everybody along. It's easy to take a few people, right? But what's that quote? Take a few people, go fast, but to take everyone, you have to go slower. And so that becomes a really important strategic conversation of how do we use that wonderful ambassadorship that's just naturally there, but help everybody grow together.
Okay. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So in your opinion, what is the most challenging aspect of working in a diverse environment?
Of working in a diverse environment? I think it's that you have to slow down. I think for a lot of folks who are, go, we gotta just make a decision. I think that time to slow down and really sort of thoughtfully think through the different ideas and responses and perspectives that you're getting, or even, the larger social context that might be attached to something that we're not always seeing. I call them invisible burdens sometimes, right? There's a bunch of invisible stuff that we have no idea until we literally sit down and get to know somebody, right? And it's that time and effort that I think is really hard in our fast-paced, economically driven society here. But those also come with important skill sets that I don't think we're always equipped for. So that's why a lot of my work is really embedding skills first, so that you can have what could be, harder conversations later.
Perfect. Another question that just came in. How would you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with colleagues who do not understand its importance?
I think that, there's a couple lines of thought, which is, be careful where you spend your energy. If they don't want to change, then, I spent a lot of years trying to convince people, but now I spend more time with the people who are there, at least at a readiness level, right? So you have to just decide, how much effort do I want to try to convince somebody, but if they are willing to actually have a thoughtful conversation, I think that's what becomes interesting. Because I think what people are missing in diversity, equity, inclusion now, and some of the, there's some legislation right now that's trying to get DEI out of our higher education institutions, which is really concerning. And what people don't understand is that they actually put sex in there. Women's work. So think about how many decades we've been doing this. And a lot of women leaders think, it's just people of color. They're just trying to eliminate those offices. No, right? We're all connected, and there's so much that's going to be cut out if we allow these things to happen. But it also affects veterans, right? And eventually white men are going to be minorities. So people, a lot of times they think, DEI is for them, but then what happens is when it impacts them. The work that women have done over the decades has really paved the way for so many people, for men to be better fathers, right? For our young generation to have the flexibility, right? And I don't think they always give us the credit. I'm always like, you're welcome. Because guess who did that work, right? And so this took years and years of paving, and I'm worried that it can be so easily undone, but everyone's connected, everyone's affected, and I think hopefully those folks will really understand how they're personally impacted by all of this work too.
Perfect. And this is gonna be our last question, but, and thank you for everyone else who did send them in, and afterwards Sarah's super approachable, so definitely come talk to her. But DE&I gained a lot of support and momentum just before the pandemic. But now there's a huge shift led by some prominent politicians and business leaders leading an anti-woke agenda. How do we help our executives not fall victim to cultural influence and stay the course? We just started to gain momentum and now there's hesitation.
Yeah, it's really concerning. What I have learned is that if they're not there from a personal conviction side, they're always there from an economic side, always. So for example, what's happening in higher ed, why it concerns us is that our higher ed is our talent pipeline. right? Why will kids want to come to Utah if they don't feel supported? And we've done lots of effort to build out our DEI offices, and there's so many formative experiences. So a lot of kids from multicultural communities actually have very powerful formative experiences in college that make them feel worthy and worthwhile, and we're thinking of taking those away, right? Well, why would they come to Utah then for schooling? And then we miss out the opportunity to recruit these kids to come to our companies. So it's affecting the downstream talent pipeline. That's why I'm worried that companies aren't more concerned about what's happening in higher ed, because it's our talent pipeline, it's our future workforce, right? So at least if they're not there completely, we can kind of point to some of these economic factors, right? The challenge in recruiting. I mean, a lot of us are in HR, right? We get more of those phone calls. Is it safe to live in Utah, right? That is a recruiting conversation, and it's a hiring conversation. And I think our executives need to understand how frequently is that happening, and that, you know, when we get involved and encourage our legislators to allow our companies to thrive, that's better for everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Let's give her one more round of applause.